Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in extending a warm virtual welcome to our distinguished keynote speaker, Professor Duane Weaver, Professor of Marketing, Vancouver Island University, Canada. Professor Weaver, we are honored to have you with us. The virtual stage is yours.
Well, thank you for that very kind introduction. It's a lot to hear. I'd like to acknowledge and thank Vice Chancellor Dr. Vivek Sharma, Guest of Honor Dr. Bijoy Kumar, Chairman Mr. Narinda Rathani, Group Director Dr. Amarjeet Singh Khalsa, Chairman Academic Dr. Mahesh Soni, Professor Paul Sissons of Keele University, industry founders and experts, faculty members, research scholars, and ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for your presence today and the honor of sharing your time with me. As you may have heard before my academic career, I was part of both the entrepreneurial and the corporate worlds, from private, family businesses to international. I was also responsible for business development in the AI industry. And today, what I'd like to do is share with you some of those insights from those experiences as we look forward to the gig economy, AI, and the human future in India. So together today, during this conference, we consider how best to transform work and life through technology and innovation. What do we know? Well, we've already heard a lot of this already. There's a rapid gig economy growth going on, and India's gig economy is rapidly expanding. AI's role in gig work has focused on shaping task allocation, managing pricing, rewarding certain performance, and it tends to redefine work dynamics and decision-making. Human-centered AI design, on the other hand, would take a look at AI designed with empathy and transparency, which is crucial to support human agency and economic mobility. Lived experience of gig workers tends to reflect human stories beyond economics. Gig work affects your identity, your dignity, and the opportunities. So what are the concerns that we see? Well, the algorithmic control in the gig work is one of our current issues. It's assigning tasks, it's determining pay, it's evaluating workers, and it's creating financial efficiencies, but it's limiting visibility and autonomy. I think from my experience that the opportunity is in transparency and contestability. So having explainable AI and feedback systems that empowers the workers to understand the decisions and contest the outcomes that come from a top-down approach. How do we do this? Well, one of the ways is a transition into more of an entrepreneurial shift in the gig economy. Workers adopting an entrepreneurial mindset, workers managing themselves as brands, and learning how to manage their own income streams, such that AI can support strategic growth versus controlling the work. An example of this is during COVID in Canada, a lot of people were choosing to work at home or work at different places around the world and still conduct their design and development. So kind of a gig economy developed where you could log on and you could bid for jobs. But what happened over time is, as more and more people do that, there was more and more competition for the same kind of work. And the vendor tended to have control over the person applying. It's kind of like going online to try and get a job where there's thousands of people applying for one posting. That's different than having connections and networks ahead of time and people knowing what value you bring to the table and seeking you out. So this concept is about empowering gig workers so that they're sought out. Human-centered AI collaboration looks at using AI as a leverage for the worker. So AI acts as a co-pilot for the worker. It augments their judgment and choices of work that they do, and it can reduce the cognitive load while preserving their worker dignity and their sense of agency. But how do we manage these issues? Some of the current challenges: irregular income streams. Well, a potential solution is enabling self-management. providing tools that allow gig workers to have financial responsibility, entrepreneurial training, and or tools that allow them to run a business, even though they may not be business people. There's no traditional benefits. One of the concepts to look at is perhaps a group level gig worker healthcare and workplace benefits or insurance program. For example, in Canada, we have a universal healthcare system. So for those workers who were remote, if something happened, they're still taken care of. We have in this province, in West of Canada, it's called workers' compensation. We have WorkSafe BC. So this is a government-driven initiative that audits and manages work environments, and it reduces the costs for businesses to manage employee safety and health and those sorts of things by rewarding them for having a safe environment. So taking a look at ways in which that might be created to create a competitive platform for anyone who's a gig worker. Platform dependence. Right now, gig workers are driven by whatever platform or app they're on, but a gig worker could use multiple agentic AI to seek out gigs that they're looking for, rather than depend on an algorithm-driven app that's provided from the provider. We've got intense worker competition. So I'm doing whatever I can to get that next job, to get the reward, to get the incentives, and maybe doing things that aren't safe just to win. Skilled gig worker can have differentiation. They could develop a personal brand value, something unique about them, something that sets them apart and rises above the competition, provide selective gigs that leverage value. An example I have of this is in Canada. This is probably 5-6 years ago. There was a gentleman that was doing Uber driving, and he's a very friendly, open, warm kind of individual. And not everybody wants to ride with an Uber driver who's going to talk to them a lot, but for him, that's what he liked. And he designed his cab, if you will, his car, such that there was all sorts of lights. There's dingle balls hanging around. It was very colorful. It was warm. It was inviting. And he really made it a great experience. So it wasn't just getting you from A to B. It was a journey of joy. It was kind of an entertainment. And he got to the point where when people were looking for Uber drivers, they were actually seeking his name rather than just going, who's the closest by? So here's someone who's developed a personal brand value, set them apart from the competition, and they're leveraging their value where they can get bigger tips and better rides, and they can choose which ones they want to do rather than waiting for whatever's available. And the safety and burnout risk that comes from the current challenges might be mitigated by having benefit incentives for safety. So if there's cost savings that override the motivation of incentive-driven risks, a gig worker might choose a more safe model. And we'll talk about how we might do that. So how do we leverage the future? Well, as we've talked about, there are challenges in regulation. Regulatory cycles tend to lag behind rapid AI development. This risks innovation and worker protection balance. Education can act as a lever. It empowers individuals to understand, to use, and critically assess AI and foster human-centered outcomes, rather than just using AI because it's there and it gives me an opportunity and I can compete with everybody. I'm going to use AI as a way to help me make strategic choices. It also creates a skill divide in the AI era. It creates opportunities, but it widens inequality. Making sure there's access and digital literacy are crucial to the inclusion of all gig workers in the economy. And then there's the concept of human governance and facilitation. Creating adaptive frameworks that maybe have auditing of corporations or individuals and collaboration to ensure accountability and balance innovation with safety. This could facilitate gig work empowerment. So here's a few lessons learned from Canadian professor working in AI and technology, a little bit of consumer behavior and entrepreneurial competition. AI tech experience. One of the things I remember when we were employing an AI solution for a telecommunications company is I was talking with the senior VP the night before, and I asked him, what would you say is the most exciting thing about tomorrow? And he says, oh, I'm so excited. We're going to solve all our problems. And I said, oh my goodness, if you haven't solved your problems yet, they're just going to happen faster. So I think one of the things we need to look at when we're looking at AI and technology and how it's going to drive the Indian economy is how we can mitigate problems, look back at history, and empower our gig workers so that they can be better rather than overloaded. The other thing is, when we look at consumer behavior, we see that people tend to seek the most value for the least effort. I think this translates to gig work. Less effort means you're going to be more dependent on AI. More effort means you're going to take the energy it takes to use AI as a leverage tool. The problem is human behavior is to default for least to get the most, and that creates a competitive, unsafe, perhaps, environment. So anything we can do to encourage people to take more effort to be more successful is to their benefit. Entrepreneurial competition, the more intense the competition, the more risks people will take. So this is kind of a mouthful, but it pulls together a couple of theorist concepts together. Differentiation, helping you stand out by providing value add as a value add peak competitor. So there's a gentleman called Riley wrote a book about value added selling, and in there he talks about three kinds of competitors: equalizers, differentiators, and value add peak competitors. A value add peak competitor doesn't worry about the competition. They focus on, how can I provide a better relationship between what I have to offer, what my strengths are, and what my customers are seeking? So I don't worry about what the competitors are doing. I worry about, how do I make it easier for those customers to work with me? So I establish a unique personal brand, like the example I gave about the gentleman in Uber, that I can leverage and allow for more selective gig work that I can choose, more stable work-life balance, not just burning the candle at both ends, but being selective about what I do. And then we have the challenge of speed of legislation versus AI innovation. I've found that legislation is much slower than innovation, and we're really seeing that with the rapid deployment of AI and how quickly it learns, and the fact that AI coders don't really know what's going on inside the neural networks. They don't know what happens in that black box. So that's going to happen even quicker. So the question is, do we regulate, do we educate, or do we facilitate? And it's probably easier to educate and facilitate than regulate, because I can empower you to deal with that rapid innovation rather than trying to catch up with it and provide policies and regulations, and then to effectively catch and police what is not appropriate. So any way that we can empower gig workers to manage their independence rather than depend on others to solve their risks, I think is our solution to the future. So bottom line, educate and facilitate versus regulate. Empower the gig worker by enabling them with tools and education and all sorts of benefits, facilitating their independence, providing a platform where healthcare and workplace benefits are actually rewarded for safety, skills to master agentic AI versus depend on apps with algorithms, skills and tools to build their own self-branding and differentiate themselves and be selective, leveraging the human with AI rather than drive the human via AI, and to reward and encourage self-regulation corporations that provide transparency and feedback within the use of the AI, and or audited reward mechanisms that you might set up to, to perhaps have group gig level insurance or health benefits where those companies who perform well have lower costs, and the gig workers themselves have benefits. So, any questions?
Good afternoon, Professor Weaver. I have a small question for you. When you said that it is better to educate and facilitate rather than regulate, do you see that this is going to happen?
I see it happening in some places and not others. So, for example, in Canada, I see that the Canadian government has tried to come up with an AI policy that focuses on encouraging AI, facilitating AI, rather than trying to control what's happening. Now, on the other side of the coin, I've seen social media legislation that's tried to control social media folks. And I think when you add AI into that realm, it's hard to even know what's going on. So in my mind, the answer is to educate those that are involved, and as governing bodies or those who have authority, providing tools to facilitate their empowerment is easier to do than trying to control it with policy and regulation. Not that you shouldn't have policy and regulation, but what is the successful output, and can it keep up with the rate of innovation?
That's a great prescription you have given, sir. And I would like to thank you personally, because you're sitting there at a very odd time for all of us. From all of us from India, we are thankful to you for sparing your time in the midnight.
It is my honor, and thank you for sharing your time with me.
Thank you so much, sir. So we have one more question, sir, please.
Should I say good night or good evening or what, Professor Duane? It's thanks a lot. One thing only I say as a professor, that it is educate, facilitate, regulate. There could be fourth option, all of the above. And regulation could also be a kind of a part of facilitation, because a lot of challenges are there. And I think regulator can really look into it. Through their regulations, it could be, or legislation, it could be a good facilitations to them, so that whatever the stress, whatever the limitations are there, I think that can be taken care of. But anyway, thank you. Personally, great thanks to you for your odd times. And still, you have this, appearance. I'm personally thankful to you on behalf of entire organizer. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Kumar. It's an honor to be invited by you. I always enjoy your presence and your comments. And I don't want to take up too much of Paul's time, but I just want to leave on one final note. I think that you've got some great minds here. You're leading in the gig world. Any focus you can do to help facilitate your gig workers is probably what's going to drive success. If we try to control AI, I got a fear that we will fall behind and there will be others who will just drive forward. And we can drive forward with goodness rather than chaos, but it takes some thought and focus. Thank you for the time.
It's now my great privilege to introduce our distinguished next keynote speaker, Professor Paul Sissons, who joins us virtually from UK. His expertise offers valuable insights that align perfectly with today's conference theme, Indian Economy, Gig Model Powered by AI, the Way Ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Paul Sissons. So
thanks very much for the invitation to speak with you today. It would have been lovely to be there in person. Although we've had a mini heat wave in the UK for the last few days, so I sort of feel a bit closer to you than I might have done if it was our kind of normal summer temperatures. Thanks very much for the kind words of introduction, and it's been really interesting to hear a bit more about the Institute and to hear other contributors' sort of thoughts on this topic so far. So I'm gonna zoom out a little bit and provide a more of a kind of overview, I suppose, and a sort of international focus on the topic. So clearly, AI is economically is an area of huge potential. How much potential, you get very different estimates in terms of kind of projections of what it might mean for sort of GDP type indicators, but clearly it's going to change the economy very significantly. But also it opens up, as we've heard in our kind of earlier contributions, a range of issues around how you try and generate both the most effective but also kind of equitable outcomes from these developments. Okay, so this is from a World Economic Forum from a couple of years ago. Just a survey of organisations asking what were the big kind of macro trends which are driving kind of transformation in their businesses. And you'll see right at the top, in fact, the top two, increased adoption of new and frontier technology. So 86% of organisations saying that was going to be one of the macro trends that really kind of drove transformation of their businesses. And this is from 2023. So I suspect if you take this forward to the present day, if you think about how quickly things have developed, even in the last kind of 18 months or so, you'd probably get even kind of higher read-offs of businesses. So this is kind of probably the kind of core concern that businesses have at the moment in terms of, how do they effectively absorb some of these AI technologies into their businesses, and I'll talk about some of the challenges of that as we go through the presentation. Okay, so again, this is from a couple of years ago, but I think it's just worth reflecting on, how quickly these technologies have developed and how quickly they've improved. And again, this only takes up to May 2023. But if we just look at the last 12 months, again, we see the kind of rapid acceleration of these technologies. So these are, this is just a sort of representation of the kind of development of large language models. So you go back to 2018, 117 million parameters used to train the model. By the time we get to 2023, you've got around 100 trillion parameters which is being used to train these models. So over time, we've had this really kind of rapid acceleration, both in terms of the materials and the data which is being used to kind of inform these models, but also how kind of accurately they can perform the tasks that individuals and businesses kind of want them to. And it's been a really kind of rapid process of development, and that's raised a number of challenges. So Professor Weaver was talking about regulation. So it's really hard for regulation, for example, to keep up when technology is advancing at this kind of rate. Okay, so these are a summary of, I guess, kind of what that means in broad terms, and some of the things that we need to consider. So there's obviously concerns about the implications for AI and in the jobs market. What kind of economists typically say is new technological development, and in this case, AI doesn't replace jobs; it replaces tasks. So there will be aspects of jobs which AI can effectively automate. There might be other work tasks where it will complement the kind of human the human inputs to those tasks. But it's clear that AI is going to lead to quite a significant kind of job redesign, but also changing patterns in terms of the types of occupations which are growing and those which are declining. So in contrast to sort of previous waves of automation which we've seen, which have tended to replace mostly jobs which have involved a series of kind of more routine tasks, which have been typically historically kind of more straightforward to automate, what we see is AI really starting to impact job design and potentially the job distribution in particular occupations, in professional, managerial, and kind of knowledge-intensive occupations. So that is a change from the kind of previous ways of technology that we've seen that have kind of reworked the labour market and have been associated with various different kind of structural processes, including the arguments around the kind of hollowing out or the sort of polarisation of employment into kind of higher skilled and lower skilled kind of occupations. So productivity gains. So clearly there's massive promise from AI in terms of what it can do to productivity, in terms of access to information, support for decision making, reduction of sort of administrative burdens. But critically, in terms of sort of how it plays out on the ground, it's dependent on firms' ability to effectively kind of absorb that technology, including the abilities and competencies of workforces in which to do that. And then the big concern around the what AI means for inequality and the sort of distribution of benefits from AI. And again, we heard some very interesting comments in our previous presentation about what that might mean and actually how you might start to mitigate some of those concerns. But a broad set of concerns around kind of labour market polarisation in terms of groups of workers who kind of win from AI, groups of workers who potentially lose from AI, and the implications that has for kind of widening income disparities, as well as wealth disparities. I mean, most clearly kind of evidenced in terms of like the owners of the technology versus the users of the technologies. Again, this was touched on in the previous presentation, but where we've got this kind of fragmentation of employment, that has implications for things like provision of pensions. So the extent to which people are saving up for retirement and kind of costs in later life after their kind of after their time in the labour market, but also potential issues for things like health insurance or access to insurance for social care, for example, for elderly care. So there's a range of kind of issues there, both in terms of the potential benefits that AI can have, but also some of the things that we need to think about in terms of potential issues and areas for kind of mitigation. Okay, so I'll put this up. So it's a really interesting book. And it comes down to this kind of key point in terms of, and this is more broad around sort of digitization, but this idea that machines, AI is and will be continually sort of gradually reworking the role of professionals and the role of kind of professional inputs. And this is kind of boils down to this, these two potential futures, one where you've got technology as kind of complementary to what the professions are doing, and one where its technology is essentially a substitute. So I won't talk through these in detail for the sake of time, but thinking about the gig economy, that's what we've got essentially in our kind of in our first pathway to the post-professional society. So where we've got kind of experts, a network of experts kind of connected through these new kind of platform technologies. And this idea where you have a kind of workers on tap and this kind of on-demand knowledge in the online or the platform economy. And you can see this in things like online GP consultations, for example, where we already have some of this within different kind of professional fields where you get very quick kind of availability of contact of professionals through these new sort of platform operations. So again, I won't talk through these in detail, but if we go down to the kind of bottom bullet point is one which would have much more significant implications for the labour market, where actually you have much more kind of machine generated model where machines are applying systems and rules and applying their own kind of learning and development in the absence of kind of human input. And between those two models, you've got a range of a spectrum of kind of outcomes which have kind of more or less kind of human professional input versus the balance between that and the kind of technology and the platform. Okay, so again, so I'll whiz through these, but we've focused mostly on kind of jobs, but actually AI has a range of implications that are not just related to sort of demand for particular types of roles or how they're performed, a potential for things like automation of human resource management tasks, so use of chatbots and agents and sort of on-demand information for employees. So potential benefits there in terms of firms' efficiencies. It can play a role around sort of health and well-being support, although that's kind of counterbalanced about some of the concerns that employees have about kind of displacement of work, and around employee engagement. So clearly AI can facilitate tasks, so it might improve employees' engagement, employees' experience of the workplace. But again, it's about the ability to sort of absorb that technology. So it's problematic if employees sort of struggle to adapt to those new processes. Okay, so again, very quickly, so one of the things we can think about is drawing on the sort of literature on technological diffusion in terms of how we think about this and the sort of productivity effects that AI might have. But again, just to make the point, it's not just about the availability of the technology itself. It's also about the ability of firms to effectively kind of absorb that technology and to utilize that technology within their business models. So where you've got sort of low level of skills, or if you've got short critical skills, that can reduce the ability of firms to be able to effectively kind of innovate or to absorb those technologies. Okay, so these are some policy implications that have come from some of the OECD's recent work on AI and the labour market, and they're all kind of sensible but need quite a lot of sort of fleshing out in terms of detail. So from a kind of growth perspective around investment in that digital infrastructure, around support for innovation and entrepreneurship to enable individuals to capitalise on some of these technological changes. Skilling programs in terms of the ability of firms to effectively kind of absorb some of these technologies and utilise them, but also reskilling programs for workers whose jobs or the tasks which form a significant component of their jobs are impacted by AI and technological change. And again, there we've got this question about setting out the framework for AI governance and regulation, which again, as we've kind of touched on, is really tricky in a period where the technology is developing so rapidly. So thank you very much for your time.